Oh man, oh man. And just like that, we are back. What is going on, everybody? If you don't know, now you do know. You're officially tuned in to a very special edition of the HFWB Podcast Series. This is your host, Clifton Pope. And with me today, I have a very special gentleman here with me today. And we're going to kind of tap into the legal world a little bit, so to speak, because it pays off on who you know first and foremost. I want to give a special shout out to a good mutual friend that me and the guest who I'm about to bring on share in common. Her name is Dr. Jashiri Ellis. I want to give a special shout out to her because if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be sitting with the individual who I'm about to have a conversation with in regards to everything that's going on in the world, everything that's going on with Project 2025, all of that stuff. If you've been paying attention to the In the Know series I've been doing with the HFWB Podcast Series, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So we're going to break it down to kind of see what's to come for the rest of 2024 going into 2025 and beyond. But a little bit more about my guest who I'm about to bring on in particular. Of course, he is a civil rights attorney. He has his own law office basically in the heart of Los Angeles, California, where he's been practicing law for quite some time. You could say about maybe 20 plus years or so, or so to speak. But at the same time, to kind of give a little bit of how well educated this gentleman is. I mean, he not only has an undergraduate degree from the University of Pennsylvania, he served as the president of the Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated PSI chapter. He's also the co-founder of Campus Organized Lectures on Race Sensitivity. He's won a handful of awards, kind of like the University of Pennsylvania Senior Class Honor Award. He's also recognized as the 250th Commemorative Award for Community Service. He's very involved in athletics and everything, you know. So, of course, he garnered the Club Award in 1989, Varsity Football Club Award, Most Outstanding Defensive Senior. But, of course, he did practice law where he graduated New York University in the spring of 1993 as a Root Tilden Snow Scholar. He's a member of the Juvenile Rights Clinic. He's done so much. And I can go on and on and on, but I'd rather let this gentleman break everything down a little bit better than I can. I would like to welcome Mr. Franklin L. Ferguson Jr. to the HFWB Podcast Series. Franklin, how is it going on this motivating Monday thus far?
It's going very well. Thanks for asking, and thanks for having me on the show. I'm very honored to be here.
No, of course. No, thank you for making time out of your productive schedule to simply be a part of this conversation on the HFWB Podcast Series. And for everyone in particular, Franklin, who's listening to this episode and who wants to know a little bit more of your background story, as I kind of highlighted bits and pieces of it within the introduction I gave you, but kind of break it down a little bit more in details for those who are wondering, who is Franklin L. Ferguson Jr. for those listening?
Happy to do so. First, foremost, I'm very fortunate to have been raised by an excellent mother and father.
Right.
My father, Franklin Sr., who passed away, but my father was a great man. And I say that because he did the thing that a great man has to do, is number one, take care of his family. Took care of his family from start to finish, and all of his children have at least an undergraduate, and also all of us have graduate degrees. It's a testament to his belief in taking care of responsibility. Also, a theme that I think will be important to this discussion is my father and mother all believed in taking responsibility for your own actions and your own responsibility and your mistakes.
Yes.
For the good things, and you should take credit for you should accept responsibility for the things that are negative. Mm-hmm. My father always did that. He always made sure that we understood, my brother, my two sisters, we understood exactly what it was that he had done right and wrong. Never an excuse. He also made it clear to us that the things he did wrong, how to avoid those things. Very, very clear about that. I think that was very important. The humility that he lived with was very, very important. My mother, also a phenomenal person. She, to this day, is a person that reminds us, don't be wrong and strong. You know, when you make mistakes, correct them. And that's the theme I want to mention today, because when we talk about the project 2025 later, that project is a good example of people not being humble, people taking some steps in direction they might not, that maybe not should take. But
Yeah.
we'll get to that. So I'm the eldest of 5 children, 4 of whom are living still. My brother Dwayne is a mechanical engineer in the suburb of Chicago, in Matson, Illinois. My sister Natasha is a doctor, PhD, teaches at some schools in South Carolina. And my younger sister Aisha is a director of social services in Columbia, South Carolina as well. And so all of us have been benefited from a great education that began in the home. And we just were able to continue that through formal education in grade school, high school, college, etc. And then lastly, I'm married with 6 children, blessed to have 6 children, and that's been quite a adventure here in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we were able to find and begin a home in, like you said, right in the middle of LA, and we've been able to be there ever since, thankfully. Um, and then lastly, my professional experience, I'm an attorney. I do civil rights work. That means essentially in LA, I handle cases where people's rights have been violated. Everything from police misconduct to employment discrimination to disability rights. I've got a case coming up for trial next month rather. Pretty interesting. It has to do with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act, and a PhD student. So these are some of the things that we can get into if you like, but that's who I am. I am a person who ultimately I'm trying to leave the world a little bit better than I found it. And I believe firmly in that responsibility. I believe I'm a Catholic, follow Christ, and I try my best to, again, take out the plank from my own eye before I see other people's specks in theirs. And that's who I am, and hopefully that'll be helpful in our discussion today.
No, it's very, very helpful because you touched on a very couple of important things as far as just taking responsibility for your actions and most importantly taking responsibility for the mistakes you make and at the same time using those as opportunity to grow from those mistakes and find room for improvement and learning from those mistakes. I feel like everybody in particular, Franklin, who's listening to this episode today can definitely benefit off of that in its entirety because it's like the only way we can learn from our mistakes is to know why we made them in the first place. And it kind of ties into everything that you're kind of doing within your professional practice, getting involved in civil rights, being an attorney, practicing law within that and everything, because, you're helping people, figure out why they were wronged for their actions and everything. And at the end of the day, it provides an opportunity of growth and improvement and to kind of learn from this to become a better person to where that the next person won't have to fall victim to that, hopefully from that person's experience. Where in particular, Franklin, does that drive and that spark come from as far as, wanting to try to leave the world a better place than you originally found it? Did it come from growing up within your background with the family that you had? Did it come from becoming a parent and being a father of 6 kids? Where does that drive and that spark come from you personally?
From our upbringing, Franklin Sr. and Olinda, they taught us that we had a responsibility for each other in terms of taking care of each other and taking care of our household. And I also, my father was a social worker. He ended up benefiting from a lot of the social movement after Dr. King had been assassinated. My father was one of the first recipients of his scholarship at NYU, and he used that to parlay that into an opportunity in Springfield, Illinois, relatively small town, but there he brought his family because it was a better life for his family. And he did that. And I think that the whole thought process of self-accountability and self-improvement requires you to also take care of other people, to help other people who are near you, who you interact with. That's a responsibility. And again, just being a Christian in terms of saying, my responsibility is to love my neighbor as myself. And love doesn't mean you like them. You got to respect. Respect your
Yeah.
neighbor. And that means respecting viewpoints that are not yours. We can talk about things, and we'll talk about things today that there are very divergent opinions about, but we can do so respectfully and knowledgeably. I think that's the key. One of the things that I find, this back to your question, my motivation. I read a story a long time ago. I read history concerning a gentleman named Charles Hamilton Houston. He's not as well known as someone he taught by the name of Thurgood Marshall. Of course, Thurgood Marshall was the first Black Supreme Court justice. And before that, he had a phenomenal career as a civil rights lawyer for the NAACP. And in that career, he, and something I've learned from a great deal, he had a lot of experiences and a lot of failures. And those failures are very, very important to the ultimate success. We all know of Brown versus Board of Education, where we now have several but equal has been abolished, and now we have persons having the ability to have equal rights in public accommodations, public settings. So I think that background teaches you that you have to learn from history. You have to be able to, again, be accountable, help persons around you, and most importantly, I've learned, you have to be very good at what you do just to make any progress at all. When you're trying to eradicate, let's say, a statute, you're trying to enforce a statute, you're trying to prosecute civil rights on behalf of someone who's been wronged, you have to be persistent, you have to be accurate, you have to be informed, and you have to be just willing to put in the work and time. And I think that's the most important thing. You can't do that without being educated. If you're not prepared, you can't possibly getting involved in this activities. Right. That's where it comes. And again, my parents often said, almost every day, to whom much is given, much is expected. And so if you're given a lot, you got to do a lot, like you're doing. You're using your education, your platform to educate people and help people, and that's what you have to do. You have no choice. That's who you are, right? So it's a function is just being who you are and understanding our role as people is to help each other. Proverbs 27:17, iron sharpens iron. If you're around people who sharpen you, then you're going to be sharp. And that's the idea. Hopefully we can pass it along to each other.
No, and to kind of add to everything you just said, Franklin, it kind of goes to kind of like what Jim Rohn has also said. You are the law of averages. You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So when you sharpen the iron with people who are, if not better than you, if not on the same level as you, that just makes you even better in the long run. And when it comes down to, and you kind of describe it more so than ever on your website, and you alluded to this as you were talking, as far as your father being very involved with Martin Luther King Jr. and the assassination and everything. You have a quote on here saying, "Never ever be afraid to do what's right, especially if the well-being of a person or animal is at stake. Society's punishments are small compared to the wounds we inflict on our soul when we look the other way." Now, for everyone who's listening to this episode of the HFWB Podcast Series, I want you to rewind that quote that I just said right there within itself, because I feel like that pretty much just summarizes basically in a way your whole entire practice with you being a civil rights attorney and everything. And I commend you for basically taking on the challenge and, of course, standing up for, what's right and what needs to be done as far as for the greater good, because at the end of the day, it's a battle between love, and it's a battle between love and hate at the end of the day. So I feel like with what you're doing, you're never afraid to do what's right in honor of love and in honor for the greater good. Do you feel like that's kind of what led to your introduction, and not only just into law, but practicing civil rights as far as being a civil rights attorney?
I would agree. You have a very insightful sense of yourself, because that's very insightful. I think the 2 things that I would say are most important would be preparation and accountability. And in accountability, I think in that word is honesty. Honesty. So, for example, if I were to say to someone, "Hey, I believe all children should be loved and protected and educated," right? All children.
Mhm.
I would probably find very few people who disagree with that. Very few. And but if I said that includes the unborn, then we're gonna have a diversion. Some people can say, "Well, I'm not sure that this," and it's interesting because the whole discussion, and we'll talk about this a little later, I think, about abortion, for example, is the whole temptation or the inclination to characterize it or define it as, well, if I say a woman's right to abortion rights, that's one way of saying it. Or I can say an unborn's right to be born, a child's right to be born. And I think ultimately we can look back to the 1850s, the same debate was happening, right? When we were talking about slaves, right?
Mhm.
You're going to take away my right to own property as a slave owner? Or are you going to, if I'm a slave, are you going to give me the right to just simply be a human being? You say one thing, all men are created equal, but you don't do it. So if we
Yeah.
say we care about children, well, let's care about children. And that means that we should care about children at all phases of life. And ultimately, that causes people, I think, to be a little uncomfortable because ultimately it means that, well, I have to be inconvenienced. Being an attorney, being in civil rights, it means sometimes I got to tell my client, hey, you know what? I didn't do this properly. I made a mistake here. We're gonna have to take this course over here. Or we lost. We lost, and those things are hard to do when someone's life, someone's job, someone's reputation have been implicated.
Yeah.
But in order for us to be better, you got to accept that and look at it honestly and say, hey, here's this is. Let's move on. Let's be better from this point forward, going forward. But you have that's a great point you raise because it is about accountability means honesty. You got to be honest. And part of this thing, I'll jump a little bit into the Project 2025 for a second. Um, in essence, we have three branches of the government, right? We have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, right? And those three
Mhm.
branches are very, I think, brilliantly put together to balance each other. When you have one branch overstepping its bounds, you have problems. But it's always designed to even out, right? So
Yeah.
the Project 2025 is an executive branch or executive proposal that, in some respects, oversteps its bounds because it tries to be both legislative and also judicial, and it can't do that, right?
Yeah. You can't
So
do that at
you
all.
can't
No.
you can't do that. There's always going to be a problem. You have to have balance in life. Always balance in life. You have a mother and a father that balances it out, right? You can't always have both parents saying, "Oh, it's okay." One has to say it's okay, be nurturing. One has to be, you know what? No, it's not okay. We're going to enforce this discipline here, or that. And they both have to work together to get that done. Both have to support each other in that process. Otherwise, the children are not going to get a balanced perspective, right? So we look at Project 2025. We see a blueprint of an agenda that has good and bad. But I think the most important thing I want to tell your listeners is don't listen to what I have to say about it. It's out there on the internet to be read. Read it,
Yeah.
and that goes the same thing for your ballot, top to bottom. Read it. When you go to vote, it shouldn't be a 5-minute process. It should be hours. It should be hours. You should take the ballot home. You read it, understand what the words are. Every word can be looked up, can be researched, and you can find out what it means, and then say, oh, I think this about this. So read it. The 2025 agenda has various parts. We'll go through it in a second if you like, and we can talk about what they mean. But most importantly, what does it mean to you as an individual, right?
Yes.
And at the end of this discussion, I hope what your listeners get out of it is this: get involved in terms of your local politics. Find
Mm.
out who your representatives are, and make sure your voice is heard. Make sure that you talk. Who's your congressperson? Who's your local on the city
Your
council.
city council members, your
Yes, sir.
county leaders,
Yes, sir.
all of those
Yes,
things. And I like
yes.
how you touch on that, especially Franklin, because I talked about this particularly in my In the Know series, is that Project 2025 has the ability to alter literally the whole entire structure of the government. Because as you alluded to, because of course you have the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches of course, the government. Project 2025 is basically trying to give the quote unquote next president, the next Republican conservative president, supposedly based on how the packet is designed. It's basically trying to give them all basically abuse of that executive power, basically within that executive branch. And they're going to try to override the legislative and the judicial court system when it's like, no, you can't necessarily do that, because you can't necessarily have the executive branch without the legislative branch, because they're the ones who basically put together all the laws. I mean, there's the ones there. You basically can't have the executive branch without the House and the Senate. You can't have, all those things without, of course, the court system, of course, make sure everything is being ratified within the court system and all these things. And I'm glad that we actually made this transition into Project 2025 based on what you're seeing just from the legal side of things, Franklin. How do you feel Project 2025 can potentially alter, for instance, the legal system, the judicial system, the legislative system, the executive branch system? When you hear things like, Project 2025 hurts workers and attacks overtime pay, or they'll raise your taxes or cut veteran assistance and essential services, or better yet, eliminate the whole Department of Education, things like that. What are some thoughts that come to your mind when you hear about Project 2025 and how it can literally alter the whole entire structure of how our government is basically structured?
Okay. Well, first of all, it's nothing new. Every administration has had a blueprint for how it wants to go forward. And the beautiful thing about our nation and our Constitution is that it allows for these checks and balances, right? So Project 2025 is just one of many. With the New Deal, the Johnson administration, we've had this before, and I think it's important for
different names slapped onto it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I think it's important for people, no matter black, white, poor, rich, poor, to read and understand. And so we'll do a little bit of today in that process of figuring out what's in this Project 2025. First, I should say that the actual manuscript is 1,000 pages long, so it's a very big document, and it's important to understand what it says. And I've broken down some things today for the discussions I want to start. And this is no particular order. All these topics are in the actual manual, and so I just want to talk about it.
By all means.
The first segment is abortion, and it essentially says that from the perspective of the project, it wants to look at the unborn in terms of the right of the unborn. I have an article I've written on my website. The fetus says me too. So when you look at the rights of the unborn, it changes the whole narrative in terms of what's important, right? Because if I'm unborn, I want to be born. Who are you to tell me I can't be? Who are you? It's the same argument that the slave made. The slave said, who are you to tell me that I cannot have freedom, or that you own my body? So that's a very important portion. But Project 2025 does, in that respect, it does call for the perspective of the unborn. It also says it wants to end the federal funding for Planned Parenthood and other abortion providers. Now, what's interesting about that is that I'm not sure how many people would have an argument with saying, I don't want the government to use my money to do something that I'm opposed to 100% in my moral being, right? Why should my tax dollars go to help fund an abortion that I don't believe in? Now, if you believe in abortion, great, go pay for it, right? Or if you believe in abortion, fine. But the government is supposed to do things for the people, right? And ultimately, and I believe this with my core of my being, ultimately, Clifton, at some point in time, the unborn will have a recognized right. and they'll look back at this time and say, "What you did? What you literally ended the lives of people before they could be born? How undemocratic is that? How unfair is that? When you talk about the rights of the people who can't speak for themselves, there's no one more vulnerable than the unborn." But I'm going to keep going because I don't want to stay too long on that subject. That we can go for forever. You can come back if you'd like to. And the second issue is government efficiency. You mentioned the elimination of the Department of Education. We'll get to that later. But in government efficiency, the project says that it wants to privatize government functions, right? Take away some things from the federal government and make it privatized. That's unconstitutional on several levels. Most importantly, as you mentioned, it oversteps the bounds, right? So the executive branch is like the police department. They're supposed to enforce the law. That's it. They're not supposed to interpret. They're supposed to enforce it. The courts interpret the law. That's their job, right? And then the legislature makes the law. That's why you and I and your listeners need to be friends with your local government representative, so you can actually help make the law, right? It always makes me very frustrated when I see this scenario, right? You've seen it before. Law enforcement officer kills someone. The public is in outrage and they want justice. They scream and scream. No, the time to scream is every day, not in a rally, but rather with your pen. Write your congressperson, write your councilman or woman locally. Write, find out what the law says, and be active in that process. It's not a one-day protest. It's an everyday process.
Yeah.
Right? So that's where that comes. In the government efficiency, the executive branch, the president cannot simply eliminate whole portions of the federal government. That's not its job. That's Congress's job. If Congress wants to get rid of the FBI, they can, but it takes a process, right? So you see the balance there of people, not just one person in power making a fiat proclamation. That's not how it works. Thankfully, that's not how it works. We're very fortunate in that regard, our government structure. The big thing with the government efficiency that I think is the people should know, like you said, the elimination of the Department of Education, right? That's an idea, it's a thought. And I think it's important, Clifton, to see this in two ways. Does public education work? Right now, personally, take off my I would say it does not. Personally, it does not. Why? Because in LA, for example, if I'm born in certain zip codes, I'm going to get no books, no computers, no overcrowding, dangerous conditions, and I can't study. That's not educating. I'm not being educated, right? If I'm born in other neighborhoods, I just born there, right? My parents happen to be certain economic class. I get books, I get tutors, this is public school. There's no way in the world that you can tell me that a public school system that allows for such disparity is working. It's not working. It'd be better for a person to say, let's take care of ourselves. In many respects, I had a professor at Penn who said, he said, Franklin, I think that we are going to pay a long time for integration. And I said, what do you mean? He said, because before integration, we had doctors, lawyers, we had engineers, plumbers, we had persons in business, and they were in the Black community. We had everything.
Yeah.
We had everything. Well, nothing that was lacking. And now we have such a disparity, and it seems as if the disparity has taken on color. Right? It seems that's the way it is, and that's not the way it was before integration was brought in. But that's another topic. Number 3, tax policy. You alluded to this earlier. This is something that I think that everyone should probably look at very closely, because it might be beneficial to you if you believe this is the case. It's going to essentially take the 7 tax brackets and make them into 2. That's the most important thing that I could see. And I don't know. I'm not a tax expert. I don't know what the implication would be. But what I would do is I would research as an individual. I would recommend researching what tax brackets you're in, how it impact you, and whether the change would be beneficial.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make any sense to say, well, this is a bad. And this goes to my overall theme. I can't say Project 2025 is good or bad. There are portions here and there that I like, some that I don't like. those that impact me and my family, I intend to act upon by making sure that my local congressperson knows how I feel, and I can ask questions how they can vote for this ultimately down the line. That's how I feel. Number 4, immigration. Immigration. It this is one where I can characterize it as being very, very political, because it seeks to reinstate, quote, every rule related to immigration that was implemented during the Trump administration. So that means that it's very political in some respects, and again, immigration is a very sensitive issue, sensitive topic. The best thing I can say about it is that the best place for that to take place is in Congress. Right? Congress should be determining the law and how we should be letting persons in and out, and remembering that all of us are immigrants at some point in time. How are we going to be treated in that process, right?
Yeah.
Number 5, a big one: social welfare programs, right? And so
Trying to
this,
eliminate those.
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That's a big one right there.
It's a very, very big, sir. I agree completely. How to tighten this what the project wants to do. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP program, which it was known before as food stamps. How to eliminate that, and also I think even bigger, the school lunch and breakfast programs. Right. That's an extremely big issue.
Oh yeah.
And as big as those are, not as big as the next one I'm going to talk about, which is Head Start being eliminated, right? I want to pause for a second here, because this is very important. Head Start is an incredibly successful program based on a premise that education begins from the time you're born, right? Some would argue, myself included, that it begins from the time you're conceived, but that's whole nother day of discussion. But at least we all agree from birth to 5, that's very, very important. Why would you eliminate that process when it's helping so many people? It's being proven. It's very effective, efficient process. Why would you eliminate that? Again, if Congress wants to eliminate it, it can, but I don't think that's what Congress is going to do ultimately. But this is what the project wants to do in one fell swoop. Okay. Number 6, it wants to change how the FBI operates. Right? In being fair, this one appears to be very political. You might recall President Trump, when he was in office, was quite critical of the FBI for good reason, because they were quite critical of him. Right. So that may be one of those very political ones that will.
What's going on, everybody? It's yours truly, Clifton Pope with Health, Fitness, Wealth, Business, and you're tuned into a very special edition of the HFWB Podcast Series, and it's being brought to you by my new book that just released on Amazon.com, October 30th, 2024, Consistency with a Sense of Urgency. And this is basically the trilogy to my first 2 self-help books, What's Wealth Without Work and A Dollar and a Vision, which are both also on Amazon as we speak. And basically, Consistency with a Sense of Urgency is all about how to overcome the lack of consistency and the truth on what is stopping you from putting in the work to create your own formula to success. We've all been there before, which is why I'm trying to help expose the cracks on where everyone is at when it comes to people who are having hard times staying the course. Consistency with a Sense of Urgency. This book is for those who truly want to stay after it in what they love and what they stand for, by cracking the code on how to remain ready by staying steady so you can even out the odds against you, right? This book will break down how to decide what is important and urgent in your own life at this very moment. The sense of urgency is on because time is money, or is it really? Consistency with a Sense of Urgency will focus on all the information, knowledge, and secrets of yours truly, Clifton Pope, and how you can complete your mission to discover your sense of purpose in the world we live in. Who wouldn't want to do that, right? Which is why I say we are all here for a reason. And Consistency with a Sense of Urgency will help you discover that for anyone who needs a personal guide on how to do so. This is the book for those who are finally ready to quit making excuses and tackle your goals and or to-do list once and for all, so growth, improvement, and evolution can take the course in your world for the greater good. So just like that, y'all need to hop on Amazon.com right here, right now, as we speak. Go order Consistency with a Sense of Urgency, my newest self-help book that I have personally self-published myself. Shout out to Amazon.com for that opportunity. Y'all stop what you're doing. Go buy Consistency with a Sense of Urgency. That way we can continue to remain consistent with a sense of urgency like never before. This is yours truly, Clifton Pope of Health, Fitness, Wealth, Business, and I approve this message. And go buy Consistency with a Sense of Urgency right here, right now. Let's make it an Amazon bestseller, a New York's bestseller, because this book is just for you. Let's remain consistent with a sense of urgency, y'all. Stay healthy, wealthy, blessed. Peace and love.